Can you believe it? We've come to the last panel of the day. Give you guys yourselves a round of applause. You've survived the third SAFF. Okay, our final panel of the day is a keynote panel called Bringing a Local IP Global. And for that, we have moderator Shad Hashmi, who is Vice President, Digital Development, Global Markets and Operations of BBC Worldwide. Kurt Ryder, Executive Vice President for APAC for 20th Century Fox. Rajiv Chilaka, founder and CEO of Green Gold Animation Private Limited. And Zainia Aminullah, CEO of Ideate Media. Another round of applause again, please.
Good afternoon. We're going to try and make this as interesting as possible because I know we're holding up beers. So, Kurt, why don't we start with you? Could you give us a quick intro about yourself and tell us something interesting about your favorite content moment?
Okay. My background's both in distribution and exhibition, most of it in Asia, but I spent 3 years in Argentina, 3 years in Turkey. I speak Indonesian. It's a country I love especially. But now my remit is working for 20th Century Fox, everything from South Asia, from Pakistan up to Japan. So really vibrant markets, and compared to my time that I spent in Europe, being part of an exhibitor association in Europe, it's really so different, every territory from another. Content moments. Probably back in 2005, there was a lot of pressure for us to present to Tom Cruise and the producers of a film called War of the Worlds. So Spielberg's representatives were in this big soundstage on Paramount, and we were prepping this poor manager who wasn't ready to go up. So we spent the whole night before rehearsing a PowerPoint. He couldn't hit any of the slides. We thought we were dead. Then the lights go on, he stands up and he nails it.
There you go.
And so we got our big budget approved, we released the film, we were successful, and so it was fun. It was a happy day.
All right, so planning is not important. This is good, this is good. Okay, Rajiv?
Yeah, so hello everyone. Last day, last session, so very exciting. So let me introduce myself. So I run Green Gold Animation, so one of the pioneers in creating domestic content in India. And now we're going global, so exact topic fits for me rightly. So we've done, in India, we've done from anything to everything. So when we started the animation studio in 2001, there was only one kids TV station. Today, 2017, there are more than 25 kids stations, more than 6 OTT platforms, and pretty much all the world's biggest leaders are working out of India, 1.3 billion. So everything is going great for the Indian market. It's in fact a great time. I think I've realized I had a background in software. I went to I was doing my master's in computer science from University of Missouri, Kansas City, and I felt I read about Walt Disney. I said I should leave everything and just follow or do something like what he's done. So I followed that. Quit my job, came back, studied animation, came back to India, started this company from scratch. Today we are over 800 people, and we've created over 12 shows. And in terms of the big content movement is the show I created, Chota Bheem.
Okay.
It was the idea that came to me in 2003, but it took me 4 years.
I'll come back to Chota Bheem. That you've got the first question, so we'll
right.
pick up right from there.
Thank you.
Zainer.
I started Ideate Media in 2013. Prior to that, I was at Astro for 17 years. I was heading the content business. So Ideate Media, we are a producer. We do TV and film projects here in the region. We also have an office in Los Angeles. Our series Dirk Gently is now on BBC America Season 2 and also on Netflix worldwide. So we are basically developing and looking for the best materials and trying to make sure that we produce good quality products. I don't know whether I have a big content moment, but back then in my previous life at Astro, I remember we were doing that 1000th episode of Wheel of Fortune, and we decided to do that live. And it was a great idea at that point in time. It was raining before the scheduled recording session. And we were due to go live, just as was the director was counting. We go live in 5, 4, 3. On 3, camera number 3, which was the Jimmy Jeep, went black. It went black, and we carry on with the show. I love live TV.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good one. Okay, so we're going to start with a quote from Fotini Paraskakis, the MD for Endemol Shine in Asia, and she wrote an article. And she said, if we are to create a successful export IP industry here in Asia, we need to invest in local creativity, resources, be commercially flexible, and commit to the content creation environment for the long term. So that gives us basically a path through this panel from genesis of ideas to the process and then how we make money. So I wanted to come to you, and you've started off in your introduction, Rajiv. It's like, can you tell me, like, creative genesis, what is a good idea, and like, how do you come up with an idea that you think will translate globally?
I think it's hard to define a good idea because unless the idea works, it's not a good idea. So we had many, only one worked, which is the idea of Chota Beam. So in terms of the show, so it started for me with the thinking that India needs superheroes. So when we started, there was no superhero for India. If anybody wants to meet their favorite superhero characters, they have to leave India, go to US or Hong Kong or Disneyland, wherever. So there was a need, there was a thing. So there was, I felt the kids need to connect with some character they can associate with, and who behaves and is one of them. That was the core idea it started with, and then made the characters, the sketches of the characters. The storytelling is an important part. We kept it simple because back then the budgets were different. We had to keep it very simple style of storytelling, which suited our audience. But it was, we could not just be happy with a good idea we had. I could not wait for it to be phenomenal. We had to keep making multiple attempts. We had started comics. We took, we launched licensing and merchandise. We just believed that this show will work. We knew it was a great idea, but we had to see the results which we got, and then we exploded, and we have 72% of Indian kids follow that show even today, which is great.
So it's like basically simple idea, you kept it simple and you iterated, right? That's great. Zainer, I want to talk to you about your latest foray into the big screen. It's, I hope I pronounced it correctly, Tombiro? Yeah. So what made you select that? Like, what was the genesis behind that one?
Tombiro was written by a local author. His name is Ramli. He's from Sabah in Borneo. Very prolific. He's got 28 novels on his belt right now. Tombiro was the first one that he wrote about 18 years ago. He's got a huge, very hardcore following in Malaysia. It's a story of a jungle dweller, a flawed hero, if you like, deformed face, so he's forever behind a mask. So we thought that it's a great setup in the jungle of Borneo, a kind of a hero movie, anti-hero movie that in fact was never done in Malaysia. In Malaysia, what works would be slapstick comedy, horror, humor, but a serious action movie has never done well. So we liked that and we wanted to challenge, and we said that why don't we develop this properly, spend the right amount of time to come up with a very good, strong script, and then we spend a bit of money, decent money, to make sure that the production quality is there, and then we tied up with strong partners to distribute the market. It did okay. I mean, it was the second high grossing movie this year. Okay. And that's the start of a franchise. We're building this franchise of other stories and characters from the same sort of materials.
So you guys actually took a complete risk there, doing something that hadn't been done in the market. And was that like the thing that said to you, like, yeah, we're gonna bet on this one? Was just the fact that it had never been done, or?
No, I think it's not. It wasn't a risk all per se, because it was with commercial safety nets, if you like. Right? So we had a very strong distribution and marketing partnerships. Okay. So we knew that with a huge amount of publicity and airtime and support from our partner, we would be able to get a minimum gross box office in our mind, number one. Okay. Number two, production quality was high, so we thought that, you must tell your friends and come and watch this movie as well. The risky part was the storytelling. Yes. Right? Because that was a new way of storytelling. So to me, one out of three, we could do that. Okay, that's good. Okay, Kurt, you've recently put some money behind some projects in Indonesia, and we know Indonesia is close to your heart. So can you tell us what those projects were and why you picked them?
Well, we were approached by somebody who was in contact with a producer, Sheila Thomas in Indonesia, with a project called Two and Two Warrior, based on a series of books, 80 books, a series called Wiro Sableng. And what we liked about it is very rich stories, set in the past, a little bit mystical, supernatural, and we could visualize that this was something, I wouldn't say it's comic book-like, but it's great to be serialized. And it's not like we greenlight projects because we think they have sequel status, but when you know you're working from a base of 80 stories, you're not going to be able to squeeze it into one feature. We also looked at the track record of Sheila Thomas and the director Anand, and we realized that these people were true professionals. They didn't need our advice on how to make movies, but we could provide funding, international distribution, and possibly some marketing assistance at the regional level. So they gained something to work with us, and we gained access to a market which is quickly growing. And this is something we look at. We look at where are the growth markets, and how do we participate in those growth markets, not just on the studio side, but on the local film side. And as I was explaining to the designer before, we actually promote local film, because it creates a more rich environment for our exhibition partners. And somebody might not be a foreign film, fan, but if they come to see a local film and they see one of our trailers, it's a bit of cross-pollination. So I think it helps the entire industry when local films survive and do really well, actually.
Okay, so since this panel is about taking IP and going global, I want to come back to you again and talk about you made remade Bride Wars in China, right? But the reverse Marco Polo story is you took a story from the east to the west, and this was with James Cameron. Could you tell us what made that compelling? Were it the same reasons that behind why you selected 212, or what was that story?
Well, again, I wouldn't say it was we. It was more about James Cameron.
Okay.
He fell in love with this manga story called Alita Battle Angel. And the beauty of that story was, unlike Ghost in the Shell, it wasn't really well known. Because the risk is when you try to adapt and anglify an Asian story that's super well known, not only are you going to get pushback in the home market of Japan, but the manga fans in California or New York are going to say, this isn't true to the original story. And you end up falling between two stools and nobody wins. So Cameron identified this smaller manga that didn't have the same profile. He adapted it. He brought Robert Rodriguez in as a director, and together they retained the Asian element in it. So it wasn't a case of whitewashing, which happens so often with these stories. And I think they're going to win on both sides. I think it's going to be very commercial for an international audience, but because it's got an emotional heart of this Japanese manga, it's going to do very well in Japan. So it's a very, you're walking a tightrope when you remake these properties, especially when you adapt them and they come out looking very different. Again, I think Ghost in the Shell was unfortunate because you took a Japanese lead character and made her Caucasian. And everybody remembers the great animated film that was done in the mid-90s. And to be honest, if you compare the two, that one's still better, with no disrespect to Paramount.
Okay.
Really.
Really. Zainer, I saw you nodding. Do you want to add something to that?
I think that authenticity is important, and I think just like what you're doing in Indonesia. We've been here for 3 days, 4 days, right? Everybody, and they're all saying the same thing. HBO, Netflix, Hook, View. They all want differentiated stories. But what is a differentiated story? And I think that's got to come from a very authentic interpretation of a local character and a local story. We're doing some work with those guys as well, and we pitched them a few ideas. We're doing Mad Men of Asia and Walking Dead of Asia. Ain't gonna work with these guys. They want to find that small story but with a heightened concept that's gonna appeal to their audience. That's basically how they're gonna say, yeah, let's put in some development money.
Rajiv? Do you think around the same lines? Is this sort of like the Chota Beam story coming to life with these guys as well?
See, we have. I think it's always important to be authentic, but I think the storytelling can be universal, and that a perfect example is Life of Pi. you know, the character is Indian, then Chinese director, it's complete universal. I think we are all going towards that direction where you will see more and more films or stories that are really universal in nature, truly universal in nature. I think it's that is what when the world audience would love stories, something which are different. Right now we keep seeing the same things. Sometimes I think very similar. So I think it'll be great. It's time that we see more stories which are different from what we already have.
So you're saying that the global theme at the moment is not more of the same, but somehow now the global theme that we want to find, if we're talking about going stuff IP, is finding something original. And like you said, like something that isn't too well known, because of that you're just tarnishing an image or something that's already built up, right?
Yeah. To give you an example, in our Chinese office, we have an executive there who's looking for local productions, remakes of Fox films, but not well-known Fox films. She's going back to the 1940s, the 50s, looking at DVD after DVD of obscure films, because we do own the IP, but if you remake that, no one's going to be able to say, I saw that 5 years ago, and I don't want to see the same thing again. It was from 1960s, 1950s, and so I think the same thing can be done in Asia. If you go back, you know, there's such a wealth of IP, but if you adapt it, for example, from publishing, from book to movies, or it could be, you know, it could be an oral tale that's somehow adapted into a theatrical feature, but I think the stories are there. It's not like they don't exist. You just have to somehow adapt them.
Okay, so if we get to this idea of a creative process, and you hinted on that when you answered the last question. So is there some sort of a magic formula or some like new set of rules that make IP resonate globally?
We follow a few simple rules, and they're not brand new rules. Our filters are typically, does the original IP have a following, a fan base, are talents attached, are commercial elements attached, or possible, for example. So we just ask a few basic questions. So once we say yes, then the development process is something that is of not a new discipline, but something that we stick to religiously. And I think a lot of you can relate to this is in the writing, the script writing. And I think we spend the right gestation period, the right development time to come up with a good script, with a structure, 3 drafts, revisions, polish, and all that, which is not a common practice here in the region. So the practice here is you have a script, you're okay with it, let's go and shoot. Because the pressure of making sure that you get to the 80 screens is far more important than making sure that you get the right product up front. So we want to, and that's to me, I mean, we do work in LA. If you don't do it that way, then you'll be thrown out, right? So we are just sort of imposing that discipline to all the projects that we do, and how that affects other writers and head writers, the people that we work with. Hopefully, that becomes a new expectation.
Okay, so I was reading somewhere online a couple of days ago that a lot of these global IPs, what they've done is that they've created local characters and they've paired them with really well-known foreign writers. So there was a show, a children's show called Lao Bao Bei, I have butchered the pronunciation, that was made by Magic Mall Entertainment in China. And what they did was they got Dave Ingham, the gentleman who was a head writer with the Octonauts, and Shaun the Sheep, to actually write it, to make it commercially viable globally. Do you see that as something that you would do for animation titles that you would develop?
So I will give an example of what we're currently doing. So this is something which is a great thing to follow. So we are, Chota Bheem, we have adapted into a new show called as Mighty Little Bheem. So Bheem is actually 9 years old boy. So we're doing a baby version of that. And this is a Netflix original. So first from India. And we are currently in development, we're in the very beginning of the process. So the first challenge is how do we take this local IP, which is doing great in India, but how do we take it global and make it appealing to everyone? So first, we made it into a baby, so babies are always cute no matter where they are. And I think we crossed that. Second, we made it sound off. The hero cannot talk, so we made it sound off. So I think 2 things we crossed. Barriers, because Netflix show would be released in 190 countries, so we're thinking how do we tell quickly in this time. And just to add that, so what we're doing is we tried having international writer writing for this, but they didn't understand certain nuances of India and stuff. So what we did is, they're writing the synopsis, then we're having an Indian guy write the script, and then the script edit it, and that way I think we found a very beautiful combination, and we found, I think Netflix guys loved this kind of a process.
Oh, that's really good. That's really original. Do you have anything to add to that? I saw you nodding there, Kurt.
Well, one thing I've noticed, especially in the last 10 years, the quality of physical production in Asia is amazing. I mean, the films and the TV shows look better than ever, and they're just as good as what you see in the States. I think, like Zainer was saying, the real difference is writing. And it's not that the writers are more talented in the US or in the UK, but the process is much more rigorous. So you go through 20 versions of a script, if not more. Mm-hmm. You have writing notes, you bring somebody else to rewrite the script, and basically the film doesn't get greenlit until everyone signs off. And the greenlit committee can be quite big, and it creates kind of like a crowd-funded decision on when you go ahead. In Asia, the person putting up the money wants a quick return on his money. You can't blame him. He's a businessman. So if he wants a 12-month or 8-month turn on the money, he's going to say, guys, you got to be shooting by September 1st because I can't cash flow you beyond that. And then, it drives the process kind of the reverse way, just like Zaina was saying. So if you're so focused on when am I going to get my money back from the first window in theatrical, and then you kind of reverse engineer when you have to be shooting the film, that's not really about quality control.
Okay. Zainer, so since we've got money on the table now, well, figuratively, yeah. Tell me about Dirk Gently, because you mentioned that when you started off in your introduction, that would have been pretty expensive to get off the ground, a high quality production like that for Netflix. Could you talk us to how you actually raised the money for that?
It was an IP that was a passion for my colleague in LA. He did a play when he was in school, and Douglas Adams actually attended the play. That's how the relationship started, up until way past years after Douglas passed, when the rights were unencumbered. Then the agent called us and said, hey, it's available now, what do you want to do with it? So we then spent the initial small money to acquire the rights, and we basically got on to friends of ours who were also geeks and Douglas Adams fans, and we got Max Landis. So Max Landis was willing to write on a friendly rate, if you'd like. Now, since then, he wrote Bright for Netflix, and apparently his fee made him the top 10 spec writer ever for the past 5 decades. But when he was working on Dirk Gently, it was okay. So for that development, which he wrote the pilot script and series Bible, we put in half the money, and our partner also put in half the money. We then took it to the networks over there, a very regular process, but in the end, BBC America, we thought, had the right cultural fit, if you like, because of the IP and the original work, so we worked with the BBC. So the way that was structured was, again, very formulaic. So BBC America funded the majority of the production financing needed, and between ourselves, IDW, who is the publisher for the Dirk Gently comic, and our lead studio, AMC Studios, between the three of us, we raised the gap, including the soft money in Canada. And for us, that gap meant that we held ROW, rest of the world. And it was with that, then we basically flipped it to Netflix, and they then held the rights or exploited for outside North America. So that's how that started. So I think the TV model over there, it's very straightforward. As long as you have a commissioning broadcaster, as long as you're able to raise the gap money, I think you're set. For us, we're not a financier, strictly a financier. We're hands-on producers, so we have EP credits, we earn fees for Dirk Gently, but we are on the set, we basically give notes, and we get involved all the way through editing process, so we earn that fee. Okay. And for that, it means that our net investment against the gross contribution towards production financing is a lot lower. So our threshold is lower because we get recoverables through two means. One is the initial development spend as well as the fees.
Okay. Rajiv, what about you? Do you have a story about funding and how you managed to raise money for Chota Bheem?
We had a failure story.
Okay,
in terms of
let's hear it.
funding. So we started the company in 2001. The first 7 years were really tough on us. So the kind of scenario where in the domestic market that, so we would only be able to make 50%, maximum of 50% of the production cost from doing a local IP. So that's the way I pitched and told everybody. I went to the investors and took a plan. I told them the truth that, you know, if you put money into this company, you're going to lose 50%. So obviously, I told the truth. Nobody invested. So I tried that, and then I told them. Then I improvised my speech, and they said, "You'll make money 5 years later." Still, it didn't work. But then I decided, okay, you never know. So we never successfully raised any funds. So our company, that was pre-Chota Beam. So post-Chota Beam, when we didn't need to raise any money anymore, because it's a successful model, we are cash positive, we have no debts in the company, so it's going great for us. Now we're getting lots of offers from all the top companies in the world, both locally and globally. So we're getting a lot of that, but we're going to time it right. I'm not in a hurry to this thing, because I like to take risk. I like to do things differently in my own way. So I know that if I bring in some intelligent people, they will not like what I'm doing. So currently we're running the company by bootstrapping the thing. So we're doing that and growing year on year, 25-30%.
Wow. Okay, that's good. Do you have a perspective on this, Kurt? Because you'd have a different angle on the same
Well, I think our
problem.
angle's different because we don't need to seek funds. We need to seek approval for funds. So the funds exist, but our management's quite rigorous in looking at different models. So let's say Zainur takes a picture to me and says, we want to do a 50-50 joint venture with Fox. First thing we're going to ask for is a P&L, low, medium, high. We're going to look through all the different rights. We're going to challenge him on every figure. But if we do fund it, then we're going to step back and let him make his movie. Because we micromanage filmmakers in the US because that's our comfort zone and because the numbers are so huge. But if we were going to make a Malaysian movie, we were going to invest $1 million. Once we go through that initial process of agreeing whether we want to be in it based on his financial analysis, we step back, let him make the movie. We don't take fees. What we're more interested in is the distribution of the film in Malaysia and trying to get, like he said, an ROW business out of it, saying that because we have a network of distributors throughout the world, and we have home entertainment and TV colleagues, can we do better than he may do through a sales agent? And this is something that we would basically pitch to him as well if we were interested. I think the biggest problem with movies and getting funding from somebody like us is convincing them that it's going to make X, Y, or Z. And that's why you have low, medium, high, because you really don't know. And he might come out with this film from Borneo and say, it's a little bit like this, it's a little bit like that, it's a little bit like something else. But there's never a true comp. And that's why sequels in a way get made, because you know exactly what the last one made, and they said, okay, it's going to make either 10% more or 10% less. And a lot of it has to do in the corporate world. It's not about the best story, it's do I have comfort that you're going to hit your numbers?
Okay. Zainur, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. I think in our case, we protected the downside by making sure that, in our case, the investors are vested investors. One investor is actually the publisher. So because of the movie, they are able to reprint more books and sell more books. So I know that they are able to get their money back that way. The other investor is also distributing and marketing the movie. So they earn fees and hopefully they get their first cut from the waterfall. In our case, we developed the show, we developed the movie, and therefore we recovered that way. So I think in that scenario, we sort of told all investors, that's the max that you could lose, but this is basically the upside, right? And we did the low, mid, high. The comps were difficult because there were no comps. And we could not go and compare with The Raid, for example. Look, that's just a different beast. We could not compare with other highest grossing movies in Malaysia because we were coming in from a slightly different execution and genre. That's the risky part. But I think on the financing part and the returns and so on, I thought that the way that we pitched it to the investors was to show them this is how much you could lose. And then they were saying, okay, maybe we could part away with that money and then see that as an investment into the franchise because hopefully we turn a few more after this.
I think what's smart about that model, he's chosen strategic investors. So they're vested not just because they want to make money, but because we sell books for a living, we like selling more books. Or we're in distribution, we need content to fill our pipeline. And I think Fox does the same thing. I think sometimes the toughest investors are the guys that say, I have nothing to do with your industry, and I have no strategic benefit. I just want a return on capital. Which is why you'll never see, if private equity gets involved, they've got to do slate or a slate of slate deals, and it's got to be highly collateralized and a portfolio business. You won't see a private equity guy come in and do one picture because it's just not what they do.
So we've gone through creative genesis, a bit of process, and a bit of money. I'd like to toss it over to the floor because I'm sure there's some interesting questions for our panelists here. Would anyone like to raise their hand and ask anyone of these gents a question? Do you have Friday afternoon? Everyone's like, rap. No questions. All right. So you've made your movie. If anyone does have a question, raise your hand and a mic will come to you magically and then you can interrupt. All right. So now that we've made our movie, we've got the funding, we've got the process nailed, we've got a great idea. What are our routes to monetization, Zainer? You talked to us a bit about it with Dirk Gently. Could you shed some more light on how this actually makes money?
No, unfortunately, I'd like to say that there are plenty of ancillary opportunities, but that's more of a wish list. At the end of it, it's the first window, it's the second window. I think in the feature film, it's a lot more formulaic. It's what you're going to get from your home market, the GPO, the gross box office, and what you can get from the secondary window, which is either pay TV or free-to-air, and then what we can get from international partners for ROW. I think in the TV business, which we're in as well, there's less opportunity for the originating producer to have upsides. Because right now, if you go to the big boys, they are basically working on a cost-plus model. It's a commission. We like your idea. What's the budget? We give you X% more. That's basically your margin. Keep it well, and hopefully we get to do more work with you. I think because of their brief, all of them are saying differentiated, local, authentic stories, which is fine, but it also means that it may not work outside the home market. So we take the view that if that's what they want, then we would not then invest and participate in the financing.
Okay.
We'll take the first cut and see how it goes from there. Other ancillary music opportunity in Indonesia is big. In other markets, not so. Book editions and so on, possible in Malaysia, not so in Indonesia. But those are very, very small numbers. You're going to lose your sleep if you depend on them.
About that. Rajiv, what do you think?
So the experience we had made 4 feature films, all of them animated and 2D animated. So it was so we made 2D animated just to experience the theatrical market, because we know if you do a CGI movie, we will end up spending much more, and we wanted to experience that. So we did 4 feature films, and pretty much at the box office they did we kind of broke even only on the investments we have done in marketing and promotion of the film, but we recovered the production cost from the TV stations, but pretty much more or less we did not make money on any of the 4 feature films, but it gave us plenty of experience how to deal with it. And we did some international release. We released in India, we released in Middle East. We did a very limited release for the kind of a South Asian audience in US, and so we did a limit of that. But our bigger test would be coming this summer. Summer in India is May. So we are releasing 2 CGI movies. We've invested into these 2 movies about 3 years ago. So we've been working on this for a while. So 2 of them coming up, and then we are doing one mixed media feature film, wherein there's a animated character and everything is a live action thing. So with today, the market opportunities are a lot more than 2-3 years ago for Indian domestic, especially with all the VOD platforms being there available. So we've been also getting requests from certain VOD channels: don't release theatrically, give it to us, we'll bear all your costs. So we, like he just mentioned about the percentage, so we've been getting that offers. We're tempted to do that, but I feel no point in doing a theatrical if you don't want to release it. You know, we might as well, yeah, be in TV. So, yeah.
Kurt?
Well, just like Zainer said, when we do a local co-production, or even with our own films that we bring in from LA, we try to break even or make money in the original window, which for us is theatrical home country. And when we look at these feasibilities for the co-productions throughout Asia, if we can at least break even in theatrical in the home country, rest of world is gravy, the ancillaries within the home country are gravy, and in a way they're safety nets, because if you undershoot it just a little bit, you're still going to get your money back. I think the dangerous feasibilities are those people who try to make pan-Asian English language films that are a little bit Chinese and they have an element of Japan in it, and you're going to get this star from Hollywood to come over, and in the end, it just doesn't have a home and it doesn't work anywhere. You're much better saying, this is a Japanese film, it's 100% Japanese language, it's going to make all its money back in Japan, but we may have opportunities elsewhere, but we're not even going to put them into the feasibility because it's dangerous. It leads to kind of moral hazard. And I think if you go in at that approach and you have the discipline to keep it tight, focused on the home country, and then you have the freedom to sit back and say, we're going to localize the poster, we're going to dub it, we're going to do this, or we're going to sell it to Netflix for the rest of the world. That's great. That's a fun conversation to have. But I wouldn't want to be in the position where I'm trying to, claw back my money through all these territories who really don't care about a very local story.
Okay. So as we're going to wrap up, if there are no questions on
Yeah,
the floor.
I had a question.
there you go.
I'm sitting behind you, so.
Oh.
Yeah. This is to Kurt. I liked your points about the kind of effort that goes into the development exercise and scripts and so on. So to independent investors and producers in this part of the world, in Asia, would you recommend that we try to build local talent in writing and designs and stuff like that? Or to hire the ones from LA and, the markets where they're trained better?
I think designer's probably the better authority than me, but from my point of view,
Writers then.
I think writing talent does exist in all these markets. I think the problem is they need to be managed. And by that meaning, if you're the financier and you've briefed somebody to write a script, or they've come to you with a spec script and you like it, it's your job to not accept that script until it's to your satisfaction. It's the haste that you say, well, it should be good enough, or we're not going to shoot for another 6 weeks, and maybe he can fix it then. I think that's when you get into a dangerous role. I like the idea of foreigners coming out here because eventually these markets will be bigger than North America. So if I'm a screenwriter working in LA as a waitress, okay, or a waiter, eventually it's going to make much more financial sense for me to move to Shanghai and write scripts for Chinese films that are adapted through a translator than actually trying to compete in a shrinking market that's getting mature, and that's the US. I mean, that sounds a little bit cynical, but if you look at the population growth, you look at the GDP growth, you look at the age where the theatrical audiences are, it's all coming east. Okay. So I think it's a hybrid, but really, as a financier, it's your job to make sure you don't sign off on a script. You can pay the guy, but you don't greenlit the film until you're really satisfied with it.
And Zainer?
I think it's a very good point that you raised, because sometimes that WGA writer is a great validation, but in our case, we sometimes need external help to work on the structure. And it's very technical. Script writing is a lot creative, but also a lot more technically disciplined, right? So I think a lot of local writers are either not trained or are not exposed enough with the level of structure that's needed for a high-quality screenplay. So in that scenario, an external assistance is needed. But you can't beat local sensibilities from a local author, local authenticity from a local author. So I think you have to have both. I would say that in Indonesia, there are several, if not many, local writers that are up there, very high-level quality of screenplay writing.
Anyone else from the audience?
One lady.
Oh, there you go.
I have a question for Ms. Ryder about the China market, because you're taking care of Asia Pac. We know that China has a lot of rules and regulations. do you have, do you treat that, I mean, when you are doing the whole Asia Pac market, do you treat them like differently in the ways you target, I mean, market your, you know, your local IP? Because China companies have been grabbing up all the IPs quite extensively. They just keep the IPs and buy with high price, and then they just keep it.
Well, everything about China is different. I mean, when we import films, there's a quota system, there's a censorship process, there's, you know, blackouts when you can't release your films. We cannot release films directly, we have to go through a state, you know, appointed distributor. So with foreign films, everything's different. When we're looking at local co-productions, we rely on strong producers. Strong producers in China are much stronger than 20th Century Fox in China. So our job's pretty easy. We meet with them, they pitch their scripts, we give them comments, we give them funding, but ultimately they're the ones that can really get the film into the market more effectively than we can, especially when it comes to dealing with China Film and other local distributors.
Okay. So there's a question over there.
Yes, hi. I'm an indie filmmaker from Indonesia, and I just want to ask if we have a local IP, and how do we get our scripts to get noticed by you, and how do we get in touch with you to just have a meeting and discuss it?
Designer.
No, it wouldn't come to me because we wouldn't engage directly with the screenwriter. We're interested in engaging with producers who are experienced. So, no disrespect, but Zainer is my contact, and he's your contact.
Oh, thanks, Kurt. Well done. It's Friday afternoon. So I think, Park, I think it's fairly straightforward. You approach a producer. A producer is someone who's supposed to have the right elements in his head in terms of what the script can do. Is it an art house one? Is it a mainstream one? Is it the commercial one? Number one. Number two, in his head, he's got a number, a budget. Number three, he starts thinking about cast and talent together with the creator like Yupa. And the fourth one is basically thinking of someone like Kurt and a local distributor. Can I sell this to 21? Can I sell this to CGV, for example? Will they look at this and say, I'll give you 80 screens or 100 screens? So I think the first port of call is a good producer who's got a wholesome perspective of how to commercialize your script.
So that screaming time's up, but I've got a thing. Do you have your script in your bag?
Yeah.
You do? Well, you know what? At the end of this, you bring it up, we'll give it to him, and we've short-circuited the process.
Right.
Thank you for asking a question.
Thank you.
And that's one last one, all right.
Hi, my name is Sinan from Malaysia. I want to ask Zaini regarding the rights for Tonbiro, because it's from a book, from a novel, and then I don't know if you acquired the rights, and then you have another two investors who actually partner you in that. So how is the rights distribution? And for ROW too?
Yeah, so the rights are at two levels. Yeah, one is the underlying rights. So the IP will always belong to the publisher. In this case, it's a company called Current Craft. And then the underlying rights will always belong to the publisher and the author. The rights that we have is an option on the original material, and obviously the rights to the finished product, which is the film. The rights to the film is dependent on how many investors. So of 100 ringgit, for example, I put in 20, I get 20%. That's the simple formula. Another guy puts in 50, he gets 50%. 50% of what? 50% of the potential exploitation opportunity. The revenue waterfall from gross box office after the cinemas take their cut and so on and so on. 50% of the net profit that you could get from international distribution from what Fox could do outside Malaysia, they deduct their fees and so on and so on. The net profit then is reapportioned pari passu according to their contribution of financing. It is not necessarily that linear, meaning there are situations where my 20 cents of the ringgit is 25%, for example, depending on how you negotiate. But the good starting point is to say that, 20% is 20 cents.
Anyone else? No. Okay, so we're out of time. I have to thank the panelists, and we have to get a script, right? Okay. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, guys.
That was really good.